There is a major disconnect between discovery science and what has to happen at a clinical level, but there are two other major gaps as well. You need to connect this with medtech, because ultimately if you want to provide solutions, it cannot happen by simply identifying something that works as a treatment. It has to have a medical technology aspect as well. And something that most people forget is the importance of public health, because what works for 10 or 15 patients may not be necessarily something that will work at a community level. So public health becomes the other big challenge in this particular aspect. So I'm going to talk about something that all of us should be paying attention to, and you'll realize why I've said this. Wake up, smell the looming disaster, and join hands. As Dipanvita said, I have multiple associations. My primary research has always been in TIFR. I have 2 labs in TIFR Bombay and TIFR Hyderabad. I've also started with Mahendra. I'm going to largely discuss about that because of what Dipanvita asked me. We started a new unit called Arumda. And of course, I'm also associated with CDFD, and probably I'll talk about CDFD at the next time, and I'll request Dipanvita and IKP to give me a second chance sometime later. So the question is, why do basic scientists don't translate? And I'm not using the word translate as a dirty word, because many basic scientists usually run away from the word translate. We could probably end up discussing this for the rest of the day, including with spirits, and I don't think we'll come up with an answer about why this is easy or difficult to do things. So here is an experiment that we started, an adventure, so to speak, and I'm going to largely highlight that and how basic sciences and translation need not be two opposing ends. In fact, they can go hand in hand. So all of us have heard that there is a burning need for going from bench side to bedside and bedside to, and the reverse. So there is a need for forward and reverse translation. And often we miss the most important people here, which is the people who want to get the benefit. They are the real stakeholders, and I think Anu did mention about that. Now, there is a major disconnect between discovery science and what has to happen at a clinical level, but there are two other major gaps as well. You need to connect this with medtech, because ultimately if you want to provide solutions, it cannot happen by simply identifying something that works as a treatment. It has to have a medical technology aspect as well. And something that most people forget is the importance of public health, because what works for 10 or 15 patients may not be necessarily something that will work at a community level. So public health becomes the other big challenge in this particular aspect. Now, what do we do, and why did we even think about combining basic science with translation? I'm sure immortality and aging did come in this context. It's not just only us who have thought about immortality, even gods wanted to live forever. I'm sure you know all the histories and mythologies of how gods fought with the demons for living forever. But it's very important for us because it's not about aging and dying, but it's important about knowing how healthy you live. And of course, nobody wants to live forever, because the pro is, of course, you live forever, but everybody else whom you knew around you would have died. And then what's the point of living a lonely life? So therefore, I would rather emphasize on the healthy aging part. So most of our work has been looking at how environment and diet influences metabolism. And metabolism is the fundamental for everything that you think about in biology. Unfortunately, the genome revolution undermined biochemistry, and we are still reeling under the pressure of identifying gene is going to give me everything as an answer, but unfortunately it doesn't. So therefore, there is a huge complex interplay between multiple stressors. There is an infection and inflammation stress. There's a metabolic stress. There is xenobiotic or genotoxic stress. All of these are encoded in the environment. And how do you uncover and decipher the interplay between these will actually what lead to both fundamental research but also translation. Now, in this context, what we have been doing in our lab, much before we even thought about Arumda, was basically decoding information in all its complexity as biology offers. And in fact, gone are the days where you can think about, I'm a molecular biologist, I'm a biochemist, I'm a systems biologist, when you have to be everything. And unless you uncover things at a complex level, you're really not going to come up with answers, because there is an interaction in a non-linear scale, both in space and time, that all of these molecules have, and that's what giving you biological mechanisms. So therefore, a systems level approach is required for understanding questions, even if you want to translate at a clinical level, or even if you want to bring it at a level where you can market a product for intervention. And that's probably the reason why many things that work in one population does not work in the other population, because you have really not understood the interplay between complex players. So I'm not going to go into the details of science, because I know it's a mixed audience, but I'll just give you how, again, a journey of starting in basic science evolved into something that could potentially have a translational perspective, right? Okay, so if you think about metabolism and aging, there are many factors that contribute. I think many of you will be familiar with these terms. I don't want to go into the details, but essentially it's important to understand how these work in space and time. And one of the important things that also is often forgotten is the concept of plasticity and memory. What do I mean by that? So there is a lot of reactions that occur through noise and signal ranges. So that means they oscillate in various dimensions, and there's plasticity to the entire response, because you don't want to be straitjacketed, because you have no idea about the environment that you're going to face as a biological system. So you want to be more plastic. But every plastic reaction is encoding a memory of what you have to do in the future, because biology is making sure that it's training the mechanisms to be prepared for the outcome that you may not even know what will the challenge be in the future. So there are two concepts of plasticity and memory, and which is very important for you to understand. And this has huge relevance even for translation from a med tech, because what happens early in life has an impact late in life. So that means you have to understand both the plasticity and memory concepts. Now, I'll just give two examples of where basic science may have a potential to translate, but we have not translated it because, we need medtech, we need several other things, but here is where, it becomes exciting. So I'm sure all of you know what microRNAs are. This year, the Nobel Prize was given to both Victor Ambrose and Gary Ruvkun for discovering these microRNAs. We've been working with this for quite some time now, and we identified microRNAs that oscillate in the liver during fed and fast cycle. And I'll tell you, if I can sample all of your blood or livers, I mean, I can't get your livers probably, but blood, I will see these oscillation of these microRNAs. And if the longer I keep in this room and keeping you away from lunch, I can see the peak of the microRNAs go up much more. Now, what we identified is these microRNAs have the most powerful ability to tune physiology at an organismal level, and we were talking about microRNAs that are specifically expressed in the liver that have a phenomenal effect on the whole organismal energy homeostasis. I'm not going to the details because, again, I understand this is a mixed audience, but just suffices to say that if I scavenge these microRNAs from the liver, it was sufficient to give me a phenotype that kind of mimicked what happens in a diabetic individual. Very powerful. What is the potential, translational perspective? I could probably start a company, and in fact, I did think about it. I even named it called HEPA-MIRS, because I thought I will make hepatic microRNAs that will have an impact on physiology. But of course, I ended up doing many things, and now I'm a director. That means I have no control over my life. Someone else controls my life. So in principle, discovery has such potential to give you novel identities of molecules, or molecules that you knew existed but their behaviors were not known. And by identifying those behaviors, you can actually reap the changes that are happening again in space and time that can be useful for intervention. The second aspect, even more simpler. I don't know how many of you exercise during the day. Exercise is very important. I'm sure all of you will concur. And unfortunately, most of us don't get time, or we take an excuse that we can't exercise. There's this very glamorous or a sexy concept that has come up, which is called chrono exercise. That means what time of the day you want to exercise. People have largely debated about when do you want to exercise and whether that time of the day exercise actually matters. Very simple concept, but we don't understand biology of what happens when you exercise in the morning or evening, because your physiology is very different. In the morning you have a different metabolic status, in the evening you have a different metabolic status. When does it matter what kind of exercise you do? So we simply asked very simple-minded questions, and we actually, of course, used a preclinical model. As is established in humans and in other systems, we found that there is a time of the day dependent exercise capacity in mice, and we actually found the fundamental determinants of this exercise capacity in the muscle is actually the mitochondria. Now, in retrospect, being a biochemist or a physiologist, you can say, yeah, that's kind of assumed, right? Because you would have known, you would have anticipated that mitochondria, that are the powerhouses of the cell, would be driving the exercise capacity in the muscles. But unfortunately, until we showed it, it was not clear. So what is the potential here? We know that a lot of diseases, particularly in the context of aging and metabolic syndromes, have a mitochondrial basis. In fact, pretty much everything that happens in eukarya actually have a mitochondrial basis. So can we tweak mitochondria, and can we think about how to empower mitochondria by exercising in the morning or evening so that you can get better health? So these are just examples of how you cannot create translation out of void. Vacuum does not create translation. You have to have fundamental discoveries which will fuel translation. Unfortunately, in the current context, translation is given so much importance that discovery, basic biology, has gone out of the window. And in fact, all the problems that we have been hearing, including in the closed door session, that industry also want trained manpower. Trained human resources. Who's going to train these human resources? Is the basic fundamental biology research labs that will generate these researchers who will, of course, fuel the economy and contribute to the entrepreneurs. But is this enough? Okay, fine, you continue to do these fundamental discoveries. Can you do something beyond what you've been doing? Is there an opportunity that is lost, was a question that I asked, and I remember this very vividly. I'm not going to name the names of two very well-known scientists. It was about 10 years ago. I had established my lab in TIFR for about 10 years. I went and told this person that, I don't want to end my career publishing 10 more papers. Suppose if I had 120 papers, would it make a difference if I had 130 papers or 150 papers? I'm not saying I'll stop publishing, but does it make sense? The person said, yeah, aren't you too young to say this? And, are you actually taking a safe path by saying that I don't want to be as productive as whatever? The point is, at some point, I said that, is this enough? Because also we were working in domains which had direct impact on human health. So there was an opportunity that, was ready, begging at us. And so therefore, we thought of building a dedicated center for metabolic disease and aging, because we don't have one. And the rest of the talk, I'll largely focus on this particular aspect, since Dipanvita requested me to specifically talk about this. Now, this is a slide I think many of you probably have seen in different avatars. We have the dubious distinction as a country of being the global capital of obesity, diabetes, neurodegeneration, whatever you call it. And there are several reports that have highlighted how Indians are more susceptible. Blame it on genes, blame it on our diet, they blame it on environment. Whatever it is, we have the highest incidence of metabolic diseases. Now, if this is where we are, and what we have been doing is discovery science, hopefully, that was unraveling the information of how metabolism and genetics crosstalk with each other to give you outputs. So we said, can we look at this as an opportunity? So then we set up this particular unit called ARUMDA, which is called Advanced Research Unit on Metabolism, Development and Aging. I'll tell you a little bit about this. So what is the overview and mission of this particular enterprise? The reason I'm going to talk about this is because, again, I want to reiterate the point that fundamental discovery is absolutely essential to translate, but it's not necessary for you to think that if I do translation, I have to forget fundamental discovery. Both can happen simultaneously. So what was the concept or context of why we started this? I'm sure all of us agree, all diseases run into old age, and of course that's one of the most fearful factors for many of us. And there is still no dedicated center in the country to study metabolic disease and aging. We have several neurobiology disease centers, we have several cancer research institutes. There is none for studying metabolism and aging. And people who think cancer is a genetic disease, actually cancer is also a metabolic disease, because it's the metabolism that's driving the cancer growth. So therefore, there is a fundamental need to understand metabolism in all its complexity. So, of course, it has many connotations, which I've listed here, including onconutrition, cachexia. You can list down all of these, including TB itself, where nutrition becomes such a powerful intervention for countering tuberculosis. So, therefore, nutrition and metabolism are fundamental principles on which most of, or almost all of clinical interventions have to be based on. So, this was started by me and Mahendra, and the reason I put these pictures is not just to brag about myself, but I wanted to credit Mahendra here because he's been an equal lead on this. And we've missioned Arunda in a very interesting manner. And I've highlighted the word empower because it's not about only doing science that you can do, but actually empowering the community to do something that you couldn't do or others couldn't have thought about doing without enabling the community to do, and I'm going to highlight that. So Arunda has a three avatars. One is it's a physical center which is in TIFI Hyderabad. It is a virtual network, and there is also a national facility. So we have a website. It's kind of outdated. We have several institutions. We have strung together many institutions together. The reason is that a complex problem requires complex interplay between multiple expertises, and there's no reason for any one of us saying that I am capable of solving this problem. Truly, none of us are capable of solving any problem in isolation. So the idea was to bring together multiple stakeholders in this particular program. And also, most importantly, bring together basic scientists and clinicians at a scale that has never happened in the country so far, is what I'm made to believe. This is not something that I'm saying, because clinicians and basic biologists do collaborate, but one-on-one. Here is a platform-level collaboration. We have a strong scientific board. We have several people, and in fact, what I'm going to describe in the next couple of slides is all thanks to them, because it's their work and their commitment and their motivation that is enabling me to stand here and give this talk. So, if you want to talk about metabolism and aging, can you pick one problem that is important for the country and probably important for the rest of the world as well? Because it's not about only addressing something that's specific to the nation, but it should also probably matter for the rest of the world, because solutions that you're going to find here may have an impact for solutions elsewhere. So I don't know how many of you have heard about double burden of malnutrition. It's one of the biggest problems that the countries, particularly the low and middle income countries, are facing, which is the coexistence of obesity and malnutrition within the same population. You also have a third concept called triple burden of malnutrition, which is deficiency. That means you will be eating calorie-rich food, but they'll be nutrient poor. So that means you have a triple burden. That means you don't have a hunger problem, but you have a nutritional deficiency. There's also a problem of a lack of uptake of nutrients. Many people who eat, for example, meat, have a vitamin B12 or a vitamin D deficiency. So where is this coming from? There's a biological resistance that is driving. Could be genomic, could be epigenomic, could be microbiome, whatever, but basically there is a fundamental problem there. WHO recognizes this as the single most stumbling block for all countries to become developed. And in fact, one of the things that I would like to highlight is this particular picture here. Developmental malnutrition is the biggest risk factor for developing cardiovascular diseases, cancer, obesity, diabetes, neurodegeneration later in life. That means malnutrition during development predisposes you to diseases later in life. And even as a kid, you can imagine it impacts two most important factors. One is physical growth, and the other one is neuro or intellectual growth, which is important because otherwise you're going to be fixing the population at the same level. That means children who are born to malnourished children will always be malnourished because never be able to get the jobs that we have, because they will never be able to match up either physical or intellectual capabilities. I'll skip this. Now, why is this important? That's what I said. Smell the looming risk or danger. India has always enjoyed this, what is called demographic dividend, because we have one of the youngest populations in the world, and it will continue to be young for quite some time. But imagine in about 20 years or 30 years, by 2050, and I'm going to emphasize on the importance of what the government is also envisioned, which is called this Amrit Kal Bharat, or the 2047. By 2050, almost all of these population would be, a median age would be around 50. This is when normally obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases start coming up. But remember what I told you. I said malnutrition predisposes you to these diseases much more. That means population that is young now, they are healthy, but they were malnourished. They have a much higher risk of developing all of these deadly diseases as they grow old. So therefore, India is probably looking at a worst case where you will have phenomenal numbers of populations or individuals who will come down with these diseases by 2050. Let's say if I want to put economic numbers to this, and this is largely to convince the government and private stakeholders about why this is an important problem. It is estimated that around 500 million youth will be in India by 2030. can you imagine what will be the proportion of healthy population there and fitness for demanding and competitive jobs? It's very well known by economic surveys that malnourished children typically earn 20 to 30% less in adulthood. It is also estimated that economic burden of childhood malnutrition is close to about $30 to $40 billion in 2030. Many people have said $20 to $30 billion or $30 to $40 billion is not much of a money for a country like India, because we're going to be a several $1 trillion economy. It's not about money at all, because the impact of economic disability at the individual level is also very important, which we're forgetting. But the other equal important thing here is that the economic cost of early onset non-communicable diseases and lifelong morbidity is several folds higher. It's going to be much more than the number that I've put here, which is $30 to $40 billion. The other myth in the room is that, if we become a rich country, malnutrition will disappear. But actually, malnutrition is different from undernutrition. Malnutrition is something that plagues even the socioeconomically well-to-do populations, because eating in a cafeteria, drinking all your sweetened beverages is also malnutrition, because you're actually consuming non-nutritious food. In fact, the Western countries also have malnutrition, very different from what we have in India, but even socioeconomically well-to-do people have this. The other problem is, in India so far, everything that we've thought about diagnostic tests, whether it is standard biochemical tests, have all been done on averaged numbers. That means I take a country as an average. Your nutritional requirements, country as an average. We have not mapped the diet, genetic and geographical diversities of our physiologies, and how that may impact how medicine will have to change in the future, because also climate change is going to happen. Simply put, I'll give an example. Somebody who's in a colder climate, moving to a warmer climate, will have a higher risk of diabetes and obesity, because the energy metabolism will change. So therefore, thinking about very simple-minded questions will not be sufficient. You need to go beyond what you're doing right now. Now, India is particularly challenged because we have high prevalence of malnutrition in India, demonstrated by several publications, government's own data from NFHS surveys, which is National Family Health Surveys, and it's kind of exaggerated or exacerbated by BMI-based measurements. That means all of us think that as long as I know what my body shape is, I will know whether I'm healthy or not. Nobody knows that even though I'm looking lean, I might be physiologically obese. That means there is a concept of body composition. Very rarely this is used in the clinics, at least at the public health or a community level, for measuring. Of course, we have other things that I've mentioned earlier. Now, why should we care about this? I don't know how many of you have heard about this concept called DALY, which is disability adjusted life years. It's a combination of the number of years you've lost because of an early mortality, or the number of years you have lost because of a morbidity. That means the number of years you live with a disease. That means you have disability adjusted life years, which is combination of both mortality and disability. If you look at this, I don't know if it's visible, childhood and maternal malnutrition, high cholesterol, high fasting glucose, all of this contribute to the biggest DALY risk. That means you're sitting, and this is probably reiterating what I told you earlier. This is a looming risk that is facing this population. All of us are going to face it. It's not just at a country level. All of us have to be equally worried. Now, for those of people, whether it's a researcher or a policymaker, just by becoming rich, you're not going to solve the problem. Here is a graph that I've picked up from WHO report, which shows that as the country has become rich, that means as the per capita income has increased or the GDP has increased, the number of people who consume sugar-sweetened beverages, or the amount of sugar-sweetened beverages each individual consumes over a day has increased tremendously. And in fact, this is also about how our industries are not helping, probably, because the just sheer number of advertisements that you have for confectioneries is much larger than something that is nutritious, which tells you that we are sitting on a time bomb and we have no idea how to take care of this particular problem. So therefore, the scope and mission for Arumda was very well defined. We started this around 2020. It was formally announced and inaugurated by Professor Vijay Raghavan. Vijay was the PSA then. And we also have an inter-ministerial agreement between DAE and DBT, and I'll tell you why DAE become relevant. And of course, DBT, all of us know why DBT is important in this particular game. But is there a science that we are trying to chase, and is that science is important to translate into human intervention, both at an individual level and at a community level? All of us know that there are deficiencies, that is, let's say on the right-hand side here, you have clinical manifestations, which is obesity, diabetes, whatever. On the left-hand side, you have deficiencies, either because you're not eating the nutritious food, or the nutrition is not getting absorbed. But fundamentally, the most important question that needs to be addressed, even from a biology perspective, is at the center. We don't understand systemic metabolism as well as we should. We don't understand energy expenditure. We don't know how many of us, despite having a very small caloric food, we might not be burning energy at all. That means we are conserving all our nutrition in terms of fat. We also don't know whether each of us will burn equal amount of fat, equal amount of protein, or equal amount of carbohydrate, which is where obesity and diabetes starts taking shape at a biochemical level. The worst fear is the impact of long-term implications of inappropriate intervention. There is a risk that what I understand today of your phenotype, if I start intervening and giving you some nutrition supplements, you may think that you are solving the problem right now, but actually you might be creating another problem. But I would have retired, I probably died by the time this individual shows up with a disease risk later. And can we identify predictive biomarkers that also help explain inappropriate interventions? We are also doing a lot of work with agriculture people and trying to identify native crops that are most important for identifying non-homogeneous nutrition or dietary habits. So this is a comprehensive approach. To do this kind of a scale and scope, we need large number of people. I did tell you that, and it's thanks to them that we are able to do this. And also you need to spawn this in a way that it becomes sustainable and you have multi-dimensional impact. So one of the things that we said is, of course, basic biology discovery is important. Clinical intervention is important. There are two other arms without which none of these efforts would have fruition. One is training next generation scientists, and the other one is building up state-of-the-art facilities. So we realized that without building state-of-the-art facilities, we won't survive, but we also realized that these facilities do not exist for the country which can provide service to everybody, and accessibility and equitable science is an important thing. I have no idea who in a university stuck in the middle of nowhere wants to be an entrepreneur but is not able to do any development because he or she does not have access to either information or technology. This is something that all of us here also have to think about. It's one thing to talk about how to take entrepreneurs ahead. How do you create entrepreneurs by giving equitable access to technology is an important thing. So we wanted to also build equitable access to technologies. So this is where building capacity and enabling community becomes important. And I'm going to highlight the word empower that I mentioned in the mission of Arunda. So what we did do, first thing we set up what is called a National Analytical Facility for Nutrition and Metabolism Research. This is now providing service to everybody in the country, although we have been in operation for about a year and a half. Of course, COVID put a stop for many things. It's going to be officially announced or dedicated to the country in November by, I'm told, DAE Secretary. But there is another interesting aspect to this, which is the importance of stable isotopes. And like Professor Balram was saying, NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, here these are stable isotopes that are not radioactive, that are safe. Of course, you're not going to consume anything. Even a paracetamol consumed over at an excess level becomes toxic, and you could die because of liver failure simply because of paracetamol overdose. So what I'm going to say is that there are stable isotopes which can be used for measuring the uptake and utilization of nutrients, which the International Atomic Energy Agency actually funds and supports on a global level. So what is the equivalent of IAEA in the country? Of course, DAE become the equivalent of the IAEA in the country. And one of the simplest measures is use of this particular molecule called deuterated water, which the DAE produces in tons. And I don't know how many of you know, all of us can drink D2O. To a certain extent, it is actually very safe. Even newborn kids can be fed D2O. And the amount of D2O that gets diluted in the body is a direct measure of body composition. You can actually measure fat mass to lean mass ratio in like this, and can be employed at Anganwadi levels. You don't need people to come to tertiary healthcare centers. So that was the vision that we had. And in fact, it's already started. So what have we done beyond this? Now, energy expenditure is very important, and rarely even many clinicians or people who work on nutrition think about this. So we said if you don't measure energy expenditure, it's going to be a big elephant in the room that is being ignored. So we are setting up the country's first human metabolic chambers in CMC Vellore, and for this, again, the funding has come through CSR funding from a big industry in India. So here is again an interesting aspect where industry, academia, and clinical partners are coming together, where DAE or TIFR is setting up a facility in CMC Vellore, and the funding has come from an industry. A fantastic thing, an example that is useful for many things as we go along. So what do we do? Okay, so basic biology, of course. If you want to understand how things are changing across a lifespan, you have to do what are called both cross-sectional and longitudinal studies. That means we set out to ask what happens when you're an adult, that means in aging, but you also go back all the way and look at what happens in pre-pubertal or adolescent girls, because their reproductive health becomes very important. If their reproductive health is compromised, their ability to gestate healthy babies is going to be compromised, and therefore malnutrition sets much before the kid is even born. So we have now therefore put together multiple studies which give you both cross-sectional and longitudinal perspectives. In the paucity of time, I'm not going to go into the details, but if anybody is interested, we can talk about this later. But I'll just give you some snapshots of data and why this is so powerful and why our interactions with the clinicians, and now we have multiple clinicians we are actually doing across the country in multiple sites, has been very informative. So all of us know that the double burden of malnutrition exists, right? That means you have malnutrition and obesity in the same population. But we simply asked, when does this double burden set in a population? And largely the credit goes to Dr. Beena Koshy, who is a developmental pediatrics chair of development pediatrics at CMC. This cohort has been currently running with her, and she's done phenomenal work. In fact, she does neurocognitive functions and social behaviors, and she has found that corpus callosum development is compromised in individuals who have lower IQ because of malnutrition. They're otherwise normal kids, it's just that their IQ or STEM capabilities are slightly lower. And then, this particular data was analyzed by a postdoc that I have called Birsun. Actually, she moved from Turkey to India because she wanted to work with Arunda. So what have we found? We simply mapped the anthropometry, that means the growth trajectories of children from the time they were born until what their age now, which is around 12 to 14 years of age. And we have actually looked at how do they belong in terms of severe thinness, normal, overweight, and obese. What came out as a surprise, and we didn't anticipate it, is that suddenly these kids start showing typical signs of double burden of malnutrition after the age of 5 years or 6 years. That means until 5 to 6 years, they're pretty much so-called normal, at least from an anthropometry perspective. So that means if you want to intervene, you know exactly what is a window that is open for you to intervene. And you can also ask what changed in this particular age group that made them to have both severe thinness and obesity setting in this particular population. Now, can we get a metabolic underpinning for this? And can we ask, are there metabolic drivers that contribute to this? And we have done high-end metabolomics for this. And again, a lot of science here involved, but I don't want to go into the details. We have found several metabolites that actually show high variation, and we are trying to make sense about which of these actually have a strong correlation with the clinical outcomes that we have. And these are not something that we are thinking from out of nowhere. A lot of these metabolites have already been shown to be important for both development, obesity, and neuronal growth. So here is a chance for us to probably go back and intervene at the right time to the right kid so that we will be able to provide a solution. Now, we didn't want to stop here, and we've kept on having a constant discussion with ICMR, and we said, look, can we contribute to the country in a much more bigger manner? ICMR came back and said, can you help us in creating normative baseline for childhood development in the country? Now, why is this important? This is important because currently the country, or almost all the countries, adopt what are called WHO growth charts, which are largely based on anthropometry. We wanted to go beyond that, and we wanted to provide more biological measures of normal development, and that's what exactly we set out to do. So why is this, again, nested within discovery science? The discovery science tells you that if you want to have normal development, you need to have normal distribution of resources. The food that you eat has to drive energy to sustain life, but also has to make biomass that is important to build your muscles, bone, whatever. There's a concept of anabolic resistance that we have been working for a long time in our labs, but we never thought about actually translating it. There's also the other concept called metabolic maturation. We were agnostic to it, we knew it, but we never thought this would be ever relevant at all. And in fact, an imbalance of anabolic resistance or metabolic maturation is what causes this. This is one classical example of anabolic resistance is sarcopenia that happens in old age. Despite eating a lot of proteins, you don't retain muscle mass because there is anabolic resistance. So we have, so again, this is not something that we are thinking visually. There are publications that support this, and in fact, that shows that there is a metabolic maturation which is happening in the early neonatal stages. So the idea here is to actually sample around 8,000 to 12,000 kids across the country. And remember, this is going to generate several new hypotheses, and we have actually generated several new hypotheses. Again, I can discuss this at length later, but we are going to be doing very important metabolic or biological parameters here. Microbiome is one here, but we have not listed because of a particular reason, then I can discuss that later. So it's building capacity through education and training as well. So what we do is that we have these symposia which are organized every year. The simple concept here is that no matter who you are, you could be a clinician, you could be a community partner, you're a technologist, you all come, you say, this is my expertise, I'd want to contribute to this, you find your partner, go and contribute. We provide the help in terms of either creating preclinical models or giving you clinical cohorts, and of course, methodology here. The second thing is, we are now, for the first time, and in fact this has been recognized by all the people who are contributing here. I mean, if you are really interested, if anybody is a diabetic or is scared of diabetes, you should attend this meeting. Pretty much all the big leaders in the world of diabetes are coming for this particular conference. In this conference, for the first time, you have a basic biology unit which is co-organizing a conference with a clinician, clinical entity, both Albert Einstein College of Medicine and CMC Vellore. But can we stop here? Can we simply say, I only want to bring people together and let them do research? Can we build capacity where every partner, your weakest link in the chain can also dream of doing things that you couldn't do, and also you can't be at 100 million places? Can we do this beyond? So now with the IAEA, in fact, IAEA came to us and said, like, look, you have such amazing community connect with lots of clinical hospitals. Can you, can we partner with you in taking this forward? So we are organizing annual workshops on training how to use stable isotopes, because now imagine a rural hospital in Maharashtra or Odisha, a technician who's trained to do this will be able to do much more than I or you or anybody can think about sitting in here, Hyderabad or Delhi or wherever we are. So this is an annual workshop. In fact, it's going to be open to not only for Indians, but also global South and pretty much everybody in the low and middle income countries. And this is something that's happening. And the ultimate goal is to map Indians who are genetically, dietarily, and geographically diverse. And we believe what we find as solutions locally will have a global impact. And with this, I'll stop. Thanks, Dipanvita, for giving me this opportunity. And please, you can connect with us. You can join us in all these different ways. Thank you very much.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.